Good morning, good evening, and wherever the sun may find you. My name is Walt, and this is Coffee and Concepts on Keystroke Medium. Today, we have a special treat for you. The supreme overlord boss of Keystroke Medium Empire, Josh Hayes, is with us.
Hi,
Good morning,
guys.
sir.
Morning. Good morning.
That was a little weird having you be the supreme overlord master of Keystroke Medium, and then the clown voice. That was a little,
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello.
of doom.
Of doom.
Chuck Manley says, "Good morning, you magnificent bastards." And
True.
Guy Anthony DeMarco says, "Good morning." Lauren Moore has also joined. She is strangely silent, but we say hello anyway.
Hi, Lauren.
Josh, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking coffee or die blend from Black Rifle Coffee. I've tried several of their blends. This one is pretty good. The quote on the bag is, "This iconic roast pays tribute to the determination of the American spirit." Black Rifle Coffee is a veteran-owned coffee company. I have their coffee mugs, several shirts, and several hats. And they've got great coffee. It's expensive, so I don't buy it very often. I've got a vintage roast upstairs. It's pretty good. Their gunship blend is probably my favorite. And if you're looking for the shakes, their caffeinated AF coffee is I get through about 3/4 of a pot of that, and I start doing this.
So is that vibrational writing, and then later when the shakes are gone, you see all the scribbles and decipher the greatness that was?
It really just turns into a big mishmash of yellow or red squiggly lines under like just a whole bunch of combination of random letters. Because I just start pounding on the keyboard like, story right.
Man coffee.
That's right. That's right. I have to take that easy.
Right. So I wonder how many vets who are also writers just pound Black Rifle Coffee just because it's good coffee, but also to support the vets that because they do weekly YouTube specials where they highlight vets that work for their company.
Yep.
I wonder how much of that is a thing. Guy Anthony DeMarco on the feed is saying Josh is a Folgers man.
Now I have a Folgers backup by my coffee pot. If I ever run out of the good stuff, I have Folgers ready. I was a Folgers drinker for a while. Actually, when I was in my military Air Force days, back in my 20s, I was a Maxwell House guy, always. And then after I left the military and joined the police force, I switched over to Folgers, and I've been that for a while. But there's a lot of good specialty coffees out there that you can get for $10 or $12 a bag, that are just good to try out and taste, and that's what I do. I love coffee. So what are you drinking, man?
I am drinking a Costa Rica blend from Single Source, so it's definitely from Costa Rica, from one of the local stores down here. And I like Costa Rica coffee because it's got because of the climate, it picks up a lot of the factors from the soil. So it's got like it's a dark roast. It's got a slightly salty taste like any dark roast, but it's not bitter. It's got like a sweet finish at the end. Oh. So Chuck Manley is saying, I like Major Dickinson's blend from Pete. The Pete coffee that you can get in the supermarket, I would assume. Joaquim Oliveira is joining us from down the street from me. He's the next state over. We keep threatening each other to have lunch. So
that'd be good times.
Hell yeah. If you guys hear any beeping in the background, that would be the recycling truck coming from the garbage. So that way, so that I don't have any of that showing up in the audio. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about gaining inspiration from real life. I know Tom Clancy used to do that a lot. A lot of the courtroom thriller books that used to be like 90s and early 2000s, they used to do that all the time. You know, you always would see like on Law and Order SVU, ripped from the headlines.
True.
You know, what do you think about that style of writing?
So I like that. To a point. I don't think you should copy like word for word or instance for instance what happens in real life, but it does give a certain amount of realism, and I think it also makes it a little easier than trying to come up with fresh events on your own. For instance, Edge of Valor, my first Valor novel was built on a concept, um, basically Black Hawk Down, like that. What happened in that operation over in Mogadishu, and so the question that popped into my head was, what happens if a shuttle crash lands on a alien world, and what do they have to do to get off the planet? Because it's a little harder than just crash landing in a city.
That book was visceral.
Thank you.
Visceral, loved it.
And then it Courage Under Fire wasn't a real event, but I took things from that and weaved it into Edge of Valor. But I think that it gives you a little bit of credibility, especially if you're looking for emotion. I took for Strikers War, I was looking for a really big gut punch at the end of that book, and what happens to the characters is as they go through it is just your normal kind of buddy. It's not even a buddy movie, but a friend, a friendship that grows, and the camaraderie that you have on the team that you can see. But what happens at the end of the book, I took those emotions straight from what happened to me in real life when I had a friend that was killed. And so I took those emotions and that event and seeded them into the last two chapters of that book, or the last chapter actually, just so I could have that emotional impact, because I know how I felt at a funeral for one of my friends and what they said and what happened. So I took a lot of that and put it into the last scene.
Yeah, especially when you served with somebody,
Yeah,
and you have to sit through that. Their loss is heavy, but then seeing what their loss does to other people,
right.
Not only does it it weigh you down at that moment, but the next time you strap on a set of boots and put your finger beside the trigger, you just feel that weight on your back and feel that sense of purpose, and that's really intense thing to put into writing.
Yeah.
What do you think about the way that popular novels have tapped into not only headlines, but things that of importance throughout the years? Back in the day, there was all sorts of like pandemic scares that were going on, and those were written about in all sorts of contamination novels. And we might even see that again with the recent media craziness going on concerning the virus that's out there. But things like in the old days, there was all this, like, you saw people like Freddie Broccoli really like locking into the nuclear scare, nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, and nuclear bombs, and all of the things that surrounded that really primed his novels for James Bond. But then things like seeking oil in new countries that didn't have it before, and now things like cadmium, beryllium, like all of these heavy metals that fund the tech industry. You're seeing a lot of that come down now. What do you think about stuff like that?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I just finished. Well, I didn't finish because I believe it's still ongoing. At least I hope it's still ongoing. Navy SEALs. It's a CBS show, which you actually turned me on to like 6 months ago or something, and I just started watching it. And there's only 3 seasons right now. I think it's probably halfway through the 3rd season. What's crazy about that is a lot of TV shows now do like 10 episodes. So when I saw there was only 3 series, I was like, that really blows. Like, but there's actually 22 episodes a season, and so you get a lot of content. But holy crap, they did a really good job of taking, like what you're saying, like they had in the first season, they have a thing in Afghanistan. They get deployed, and they have this whole thing revolving around the SEAL team that got killed, and these poppy fields that got burned. And then it weaves into exactly kind of what you're saying, of this new technology, the metals that are needed for cell phones and computers and stuff. They also had an episode that mirrored the Bird Doll episode, the event where the army soldier walked off the base, and then we negotiated for his release several years later. Of course, they use different names and different circumstances and that kind of thing, but you can obviously tell it's a direct mirror from what happened. And there was a lot of instances like that during the show. And I don't know that it's really easier to do that in a present day story, because it connects so well to, you can actually see mirrors of it in the news. But I think you could do that in a sci-fi setting too. And just, I mean, hell, Ralph Kern's doing it with his new Great War series, where he's taking basically World War II. He renamed the Allies, renamed the Axis powers, and then is taking direct inspiration from the battles of World War II and writing science fiction novels about that. So I definitely think that that's a cool way to go, especially if you're doing something like what Ralph's doing in Great War.
Right on. Now, going back to what you were talking about earlier about how you can take some of the inspirations in your own life and weaving that in, how difficult is it when you have an emotion producing event, not necessarily sad like a funeral or losing a friend, but even something exciting or whatever? How difficult is it to try and capture those emotions and get them down on the page? Or does it make it easier because you've gone through them?
Well, it's interesting because sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's harder, because when you're actually going through the event, you don't think about how this is making me feel, because it's just making you feel that way. And then so when you write about it, you have to sit down and really think about what was going on and what you were feeling at that moment, and then also figuring out how to put that feeling into words, and just not saying I'm sad or I'm happy or I'm angry. Kind of it's the show don't tell, right? So you have a feeling and you want to show your reader that your character is happy. And so you just really have to think about, what was I doing? How was I sitting? Was I hot? Was I cold? Different things like that, because a lot of emotions will produce different physiological responses in the body. And those make really good showing elements in your story, where you can say, yeah, he's sweating, or his body was tingling because he was really excited to go, or something like that. Or you get the adrenaline dump, or the when the adrenaline dump is over, the crash afterwards. And it's really good. And I think a lot of, with anything really, that's one of the things that I think writers should focus on to really build their characters up a little bit more, is just focus on it, like what they were feeling, and then really, really focus on how to transcribe that into a novel word setting.
Now, what's a great way to do that? Now, you had already talked science fiction, but say you wanted to do something like those rare earth metals in something like a fantasy setting. Do you just make up a metal and saying it's just a giant gold rush and everybody's just looking for that? Or how do you build a story around that when the content might not necessarily match the inspirational event?
Man, that's a really good question.
I've been practicing.
I think okay, so we're talking about a fantasy setting specifically, and let's just use your example of a metal, right? So so I have a couple examples come to mind.
Like Sanderson with Mistborn?
Mistborn comes to mind, but actually the first one was Valerian Steel from Game of Thrones. And Valerian Steel is this really ultra hard, kind of has some kind of magical properties in it, and it's unbreakable, and it has the ability to kill these magical undead snow zombies, and it's really special. But it's also really mysterious. So you could definitely do something like that, and take a inanimate object that might mean nothing and make it special because of some property it has, or because of something it could do externally, and not just being a metal.
So you can take the Valerian Steel tea set and actually kill zombies with it.
Yes. I love that when people ask me what Game of Thrones is about, and I'm like, well, basically it's zombies in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And that's what you get. with dragons.
And I mean, although Keystroke Medium has a large number of people who are very interested in science fiction and fantasy, and different genres that kind of drift to one along those lines, how do you get that same drawn for the headlines or inspiration from real life and put it into something like a noir detective story or like a love story, or like Scott has said before, his werewolf coyote romances.
Yes, the active romance. So it's interesting that you say that. I'm working on a well, it's more than a premise now, but it's a detective thriller, present day thriller that I'm working on as a kind of a practice screenplay.
So it won't be, she walked into my office while I was drinking coffee and trying to clean the stains off the floor.
Yeah, I've actually wanted to do a noir novel like that, but I need to really study the genre and study how they do it, because at some point I think I'd screw it up. But I really like that voice. Nick Cole did a book. He did a short story a long time ago. The Long Good. I'd have to look it up, but it was a futuristic sci-fi novel set in some kind of alternate, like maybe a computer reality or something, and it was really good. But I'd have to study the genre to do something like that. But anyway, so in developing my police thriller, I've looked at doing looked at different things that happen in law enforcement, like the way police chases happen, or the way drug busts happen, or the way that people on drugs act, or the way that certain detectives act, and not just the trope of the old grumpy guy and the young rookie that has stars in their eyes and is trying to make a name for themselves. Fortunately, I come from a background where I've seen several different kinds of officers and sheriff's deputies, and I know that there's a lot of dynamic that happens in a department itself. And one of the things that I'm really focused on this year is conflict. And in this particular story, there's so much conflict around just being a police officer, just going to work. Like, you have to deal with the civilians that don't like you. You have to deal with the brass that doesn't like what you did on a call 3 weeks ago. You've got to deal with your spouse that doesn't like that you're on overtime for 4 hours. And where the hell have you been? Dinner's been ready. And so there's so much conflict that you can build into a story like that I think is really cool, because it happens all the time, all over the United States, well, all over the world, probably, for all cops. And so really focusing on that kind of conflict in all of my stories, even in the last Valor book that I'm working on now, is putting as much external and internal conflict into that as I can. But like you said, pulling it from the headlines there's just a treasure trove of things that you can look out and see. A chase, for instance, a chase the other day, it hurt somebody really bad, a civilian. And so, like, how can you use that in a story? Does that affect your character some way? Does it affect the way the officer then does the chase? Does he chase again, or does he have kind of a mental breakdown because he hurt a kid during a chase? And even though he caught the good guy, is that going to affect how he does different other things in his career? So that kind of stuff is really there's a lot more than you could just take from he was in a police chase. Okay, well, what happened in that chase, and does it affect him after it?
So when we're looking at these real life circumstances, we should look at not only the circumstance, but the effect of the circumstance and the aftermath.
Yeah.
That way we can kind of get those details right in the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic. Hey, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
That's great, man. This is great timing, because now I need another cup of coffee.
Yeah, my wife made me these amazing like breakfast sandwiches, so I'm just gonna tear into that and suck down some more coffee, and then probably get some words down on a page before I go crutch my ass somewhere else. So we have, for those who are watching and interested in more Keystroke Medium, as I put on my radio announcer voice, we have Keystroke Medium live on Monday nights with Josh, Scott, and Chuck. barring any computer problems or solar flares.
It's true.
They come on and give you all in the need to know that's fun and good to grip inside the pages of what's going on. Tuesday mornings, obviously, we have this where sometimes it's me, sometimes it's we. On Thursdays, we have the Writer's Journey with Lauren and Kayleen, where they bring in all sorts of people from in and around the publishing world to talk about tips and tricks to get into publishing yourself. And what's the new show, Storytime?
Storytelling. Well, there is a story time with Kayleen, but storytelling with Joshua Gayu. He does long form interviews with basically anybody that creates story, not just writers. So he's done this last episode he did was a filmmaker.
Oh, that's cool.
That does, I believe it's independent horror films, and they had a long conversation about that and the different movies that he's made and stuff like that's really nice, really cool setup he's got.
That's because the first episode was real long form. That was like almost 4 hours, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was like a Joe Rogan podcast. How long it was.
I hope they had a lot of coffee for that.
Yeah.
And of course, like you had just said, we have Kayleen's Storytime on Mondays, where she reads a first chapter of all of your favorite books to give everybody the fit and feel of what those books are about. So with that, we're out of here. So they get yourself some reading, writing, and a little bit more on Keystroke Medium.